my students are so interested, and I think they've become more interested. This is my eighth or ninth year teaching this. They've only become more interested, and I think, unfortunately, a lot of it is just sort of like the um, maybe some more doomsday things they hear on social media about, oh, Social Security is gone, you'll never be able to buy a house or whatever it is. But all of those factors have made my students really interested, like asking sincere questions. And like I said, when I'm in my English class, I could feel sometimes the students, half the class is just like, "Whew, what are we doing, man? Like, why are we learning this? Like, this is not important." And I never have that feeling with personal finance.
Welcome to the Teacher Mind Show, the podcast dedicated to helping teachers navigate your unique financial challenges and unlock your financial superpowers. I'm your host, Sean Morgan, a full-time educator and personal financial coach and speaker. And I'm here to help every teacher, whether you're a seasoned teacher looking for fresh insights or a new educator navigating your first paycheck to have a richer wallet, classroom, and life. I'm super excited to have Jake Cousineau on the show today. Jake is an author and educator from California, and he has launched personal finance programs at two different schools. He's an advocate for financial literacy and legislation and has a lot of experience teaching finance in the classroom, so much so that he wrote the book, How to Adopt Personal Finance for the Real World, which has sold over 50,000 copies, including a handful to my students because I'm going to be teaching using this book. And he's also recently written a new book, Face Your Financial Fears, The Simple Guide to Fixing Your Relationship with Money, which was just released October 7th, 2025, which I am super excited to be able to read that one at some point. I haven't gotten to that one yet, but super excited to have Jake, all his teaching personal finance wisdom on the show today. Jake, welcome to the show.
Sean, happy to be here. Always excited to speak finance. Let's do it.
Yeah, so, this is the thing that I feel like most educators have their head in the sand when it comes to finance. So I'm always excited to meet another educator that's like, got it. And I'm always interested in that, how that happened. Like, how did you get into education and how did you get into finance and how did those come together?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, and that's a great way to. I think a lot of people aren't aware of. Yeah, a lot of educators are not very well versed in finance. I can't tell you the number of teachers I have who sit in the back of my class and they'll just be under the guise of like, oh, I'm just observing a colleague, but really they're, because it's the day I'm talking about 401ks or whatever. Yeah, so I have no formal background in finance. I think I learned the way most people learn, and that is through making like every mistake I could, either, maxing out credit cards, ignoring my lenders when they're trying to call me to get my student loan money. So I just made like every mistake I could. So I did study education in college. I always sort of knew I wanted to be a teacher. I really enjoyed it, but I had literally no aspiration to teach I didn't even know personal finance. I was the perfect example of what not to do. And so around 27-ish, 28, I wanted to get it together. I was like, this is frustrating. Like I don't know what I'm doing. No matter what I do, I feel like I'm not getting anywhere. So I read a bunch of books. I read like Ramit Sethi's "I Will Teach You to Be Rich." I thought that was like a foundational book in my life, and it really sort of gave me the basics. And so I started implementing some of the things I learned, and almost immediately, like there's a correlation between my behaviors, like the new things I learned, and my net worth. Like I was sort of trending in the right direction. So seeing this was like, gosh, something should be done about this. And I was already a full-time teacher at the time. So I went to my admin and I was like, let's start a class. And they instantly approved it. And then I was like, oh, what have I done? Like now I've got to actually, am I actually prepared to teach it? So that's really sort of my origin story. But yeah, I'm not a certified financial planner. I don't have an MBA. I've never taken a finance class in school or anything. But at this point, between teaching it for 8 years, writing a couple books on it, and reading, a lot of different books over the years, I do feel like I'm at the point, quite well versed, I would say at this point.
I love the origin story. Makes you sound like a superhero. Uh, So, my favorite part of the book was the financial connections that you made, where you all at the end of every chapter, it's like, and here's what not to do
That's
based on
right.
my life experience. Except I think there's one chapter you're like, hey, I actually got it right this time. Um, but why are those so important when you're trying to teach personal finance?
Yeah, I think, and I talk about this a lot in my new book, like there is such an emotional connection to money. I've said on many shows I've been on before. I feel like when you get in your late 20s, maybe early 30s, all those years you've been saying, I'm going to learn this. I'm going to take care of it. I'm going to get my retirement going, my budget, whatever it is. That sort of translates into guilt, at least for me. I felt sort of ashamed. I felt guilty. And the comparison I was making, again, I talk about it in my new book, not for the book that's for younger adults, but like I've struggled with alcohol. Like I've been sober for 8 years. And you talk to anybody who's sort of in the recovery community, you want to find a community of people who have shared that experience, right? They've made the same mistakes. So you don't feel so bad about your guilt. You're like, okay, like I'm not alone in this. And so much financial advice is kind of just cavalier. It's generally by rich people who maybe they're not telling you about, how scary it is. Like, where's my rent money going to come in? Like, I have $45 until the next paycheck. I don't have gas money to get to work. And so it's like if they just give sort of, casual, calm advice, oh, just do this. And it's like, no, you need to tell me like I'm gonna be okay, right? I need to know that other people have been in this situation and like there's an actual path out of it. So for me, that aspect is so huge to let people know. Even if you've made mistakes, you can dig yourself out. There are ways to, improve your financial situation. And that's generally like if there's one thing I would say that maybe sets my book apart, or like the most noted thing I get in feedback in my reviews or when people reach out to me, is I'm so glad you include those like personal anecdotes because it makes it so much, it sort of provides a template like, all right, this person can do it. And, if they can do it, hopefully I can get on the right path.
Yeah, it's so comforting to know that I'm not the only person that's made mistakes. I have a podcast. You might be like, "Oh, Sean knows this stuff." Like, yeah, but that doesn't mean I always do it right. Like,
Correct. Yeah, yeah.
it's really easy to know it, but still not do it. I've made so many mistakes even after I started podcasting, even after
Hmm.
I've learned so much.
Yeah.
And it's something that you kind of muddle through. And sharing that I muddled through this and then I ended up okay on the other end is what people really want to know.
Correct. So they want to know that you can identify with their fear that they're facing. That's like, how am I going to pay for my kids' college? How am I going to make rent, the retirement, whatever it is. It's so much better to hear it from somebody who's actually, they've met those feelings. They've sort of, they've had that guilt before, and so it makes it just way more relatable, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love it. So you you wrote a personal finance book as a high school teacher for teaching high school. Like, why? What is there nothing else out there that's good enough for you, or like what motivated you to go ahead and write a text? Because this is what I want to talk about for anyone who's like, where are we going with this?
Hmm.
Teaching personal finance is the
Yeah.
main topic here. So,
Correct.
what
Yeah.
made you do that?
I mean, kind of. Like so once I started teaching, I probably got 2 years in and I had a lot of notes, which is obviously just like, what a cocky thing. You just started. But I realized like we're sort of on the edge of the frontier here. People haven't, there's been no meaningful effort to teach personal finance. And a lot of the material, I was like, how are kids going to care about? Like, this is so dry, it's so boring. And personal finance is so relatable. Like, basically, any news article, you can easily connect to your classroom with personal finance. So I actually didn't even intend to write a book. I started writing what I thought would be a pamphlet for my seniors, like the graduates. I'm like, it'll be like 40 or 50 pages, main points, like here's the things to avoid. And it'll sort of be like your signposts and your map as you navigate young adulthood. And it ballooned to like 80 pages, and I was actually frustrated. I was like, this is too unwieldy at this point. And I sent it to my friend, like, you have a book, like you're not even halfway done, and why don't you actually write this? Um, and so my years in the classroom, and you would probably agree with this, the thing I always bring in like professionals, for example, and I'll, let's say a local doctor or a business person or an attorney or whatever it might be, and you realize very quickly, and I'm sure all the teachers listening out there, when you bring somebody in, when you see somebody who's not spoken to a crowd of high schoolers, you're like, oh, this is not going well. Like you are, you're either very flat, you're using jokes that are not coming off at all, or they're referencing things that are just so far over the heads or outdated. And so I never saw a book that was primarily, of course, my jokes. My students call me lame just as much as they call anybody lame. But as far as the way you explain things, there was no book that I was like, young adults, anywhere from 17 to 25 even, are really going to understand this. Like the jargon is both dry and can be complex. And really, if you use analogies, personal stories, examples, it makes it so much more relatable. So really just what was out there, I was like, there is nothing that as far as like a sort of, I hope my book is like a one-stop shop, between the different chapters that I cover, should give you really well-rounded foundation in personal finance. And really, there's just like there was nothing out there, and it was all sort of retroactive. It's probably marketed towards like 30, even 40-year-olds, maybe if you're in debt and you sort of have to get out of it. But there's no sort of proactive steps like, hey, if you do these things, you can avoid those missteps that, Sean, you and I have have been the poster boys of for many years, it sounds like. Yeah, so that was really the goal of the book.
Yeah, I love that. And just speaking of other things that make this book relatable to teenagers is the quotes at the beginning of each
Oh
chapter
yeah.
from students you had. This isn't a question I plan on asking, but like, did you just like keep a running list of hilarious things your teacher your students said about what you were teaching, or like how did you
Yeah.
generate a list of
I
hilarious quotes?
a lot of them, like, again, since there's primary teachers listening, like, you hear so many hilarious things during the day, or just like a turn of phrase or sentences. You're like, what in the world? The one that, yeah, so all my chapters start with generally two quotes from my students about whichever topic it is. And the one that I really remember is like, we're talking about budgets, and this girl was like, I once spent my entire paycheck on stamps, or no, on stickers. I was like, that is a hilarious thing to blow your entire paycheck on. Yeah, so I started with like I had quite a bit already in my back pocket just from like over the years of hilarious things they'd said. But for some of the topics, I sort of sent like a Google form, like when you think of banking, like what is it you think of? And then the kids would respond, and I'd just sort of choose the ones that I felt were the most entertaining. But all my students, of course, now are like, I'm in a book, I'm immortalized. Like that is my quote. I'm like, it's not a great quote to be, maybe it's not the most profound thing to say, but it is true. You are immortalized.
Yeah, I love that. So just one thing, when you watch like a children's movie, the
Hmm.
children is the protagonist, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what draws a child in. And having these quotes at the beginning, I feel like do that in your book. It makes it relatable immediately to a young adult that's going to read it, because you have these young adults who kind of feel like they're going on the journey with you, because they're commenting on this, quoting us, and some of them are like, this blew my mind type of a thing. And I feel like that just kind of helps with, once again, just the tone, the overall tone when you're teaching personal finance cannot be like reading an Investopedia article. It's just not
Correct. Yeah.
going to fly well with that demographic. So
Yeah.
I think that's hugely important.
That's a very good point. I think like some of the quotes that people like the best, especially young readers, are the ones that I would not have chosen. It's like, no, this is not a good quote. And it's again because I'm a 38-year-old man. Like, but again, the audience is a little bit younger. And the ones that I'm like, I don't really get this or why it's funny, those are the ones where people reach out. And again, because it's sort of written by a younger person. And the other example I always use is when I first started writing it, before anything else, I had an idea for a cover in my head. And I was like, this is the most brilliant idea like in the world. It was just like a receipt unfurling, and the receipt, the top had the title, and the itemized list were like the chapters. And so I got it back from the person who was mocking it up. And I showed it to my students like, this sucks. This is terrible. I was like, wait, what? And I'm like, you're my target audience. And then they're like, no, send it back. So like I asked the person, like, just come up with whatever. And they came up with the current cover. And I was like, oh, this isn't very good. And all of my students were like, yes, this is the cover. Like this is great. And so that's a very important lesson of, trust the professionals, right? Like, and again, if you're, especially the teacher, if you're producing something that's meant for young people, like, crowdsource that and be like, what do you think of this? Yeah, I really can't understate how informative and, influential they were in the creation of the book.
Yeah, I love that. So shifting more towards talking about these young adults, when you're teaching them, is there anything that you feel like is like the most important skill or the most important idea that they really latch onto? That's like, this is the thing that I really was missing. I really needed to know.
I think it's more so, it's not usually like one thing because so many of them are, yeah, I would say 95% of them are coming with a complete blank slate, you know? And so I really think one of the keys to teaching personal finance is, I always say it's like a balance between scaring them. You don't want to horrify them, but I just show them the reality, the statistics of, I focus on the United States, but the amount of people that live paycheck to paycheck, the amount of people that don't have $500 in their emergency savings. And so you show them like how expensive stuff can be and how difficult it is to sort of thrive, and especially if you don't know what you're doing with your money. So on one hand, I have to show them like, hey, this is serious, right? But on the other hand, using basic compound interest calculators, you show them how much money they can amass if they start at $300 a month, if they start at age 20 or something. And they're like, wait, $300 a month is like 1.8 million or, some number that they think is impossible. So I think, making it real, which is very easy in personal finance. You said you've taught English. If I'm teaching a 19th century poem, it's very difficult to make that real, right? It's a far tougher task. But so one,
Yeah,
you have to make it
revealing
real.
it does not necessarily jive very
No,
well with
no,
high schoolers.
yeah, the references are not quite as cutting as they once were, I'm sure. But yeah, the other side is showing them, like, getting them excited. So one, recognize the importance and the reality of the current, financial status of the world, but also getting them confident and excited. Like, all right, knowing this, I'm going to open up as soon as I get my job. I'm going to get my 401k. I'm going to start contributing. I'll put it in an index fund or whatever it is. You have to get them. So once you've shown them the fear, once you give them the skills of like, I'm not as afraid anymore, I've got the skills to sort of slay these dragons. That in my mind, that makes it so effective. Like I never have any trouble, and I don't think I'm especially gifted keeping the attention of my class or anything, but just like with that sort of strategy, making it real and making them sort of excited. Like there's never like a dull moment where I feel like the class is dragging.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's interesting that like there is no like one thing because everyone's got their different things, but like the thing that everyone complains about, like, oh, I learned what mitochondria is, but I didn't learn my taxes and all that stuff. And
Of
I feel
course,
like that's
yeah.
like what everyone like feels like they want to know. It's like, taxes are gonna happen regardless, but there's all these other things that you need to
Yeah,
really
yeah.
understand.
But yeah,
Um,
the more you talk to, it's so funny because when I tell people this, every adult's like, I'm so glad they've got this. This is so important. And then they're like, yeah, these kids these days aren't learning. And they're sort of, the posture is like, these kids are, they're in trouble. But then they'll say, like, yeah, my kid doesn't know how to balance a checkbook. And I'm like, in your mind, is that what personal finance is? Like balancing a checkbook? Like, again, because most adults don't truly know like how to build wealth or like what the important steps are. Yeah, they'll talk about balancing a checkbook. Or yeah, they spend, they got holes in their pockets. They're spending it on Starbucks every day, which you should not do. But they never mention like, opening up an IRA early or making sure that you're contributing 15% or whatever it is. They're never mentioning those things. They're mentioning things that are probably far less important in terms of building your wealth.
yeah, absolutely. I witnessed a personal finance like unit in a career technical education
Hmm.
whatever class, and they were teaching the kids how to write a check, and I'm like, is that really a skill they need to know? Like you
Yeah,
can learn how to write a check with a YouTube video if you
of
really
course.
desperately need to, but like, how many of these kids are actually going to write a check? Like by the time
Yeah,
they graduate, checks are going out the window already. So it's just one of these things like we don't understand what personal finance is, and this is what worries me the most about it is that we have these personal finance mandates coming out. Teachers are being asked to teach it who think that it's balancing a checkbook, right?
correct.
There,
Yeah,
there is no understanding of what personal finance really can do, the power of real personal finance.
correct.
Which,
Yeah,
once again, reading your book, I was super excited because this covers everything really, really well, and really basically. And that's what we need is something that's accessible and that covers all the topics that a kid's going to need to know.
agreed. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone if you're like, wow, he's just sitting here fangirling. Jake must be paying Sean or something. But no, this is not a paid endorsement. I'm using the book to teach myself, and I wanted everyone else to know about this because chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you are the personal finance person in your school,
Hmm.
and they're going to need somebody to teach it soon. You're
Yeah.
going to want to have some resources, some tools at your belt, and this is something that I think that we should all be using. So
Yeah, I do think because personal finance has weirdly gotten not a bad rap, but it's they'll say, oh, statistics say the classes don't really they're not effective. But it sort of speaks to like what we were just talking about. So many teachers, they're like the math teacher, or maybe you teach like US history, like, yeah, your social studies teach this. And so it's people like, I don't want to teach. Like, I'm afraid of it. Like, I'm afraid of this thing. Now you're forcing me to teach it. And you're right. They'll like hop on and maybe try to find some curriculum. And it's like checkbook writing. And I'm not knocking this as a teacher. I've definitely been in a, "Whew, we need to run out the clock" situation. And you might be like, ooh, writing a check could take 30 minutes. But like the personal finance side of me is like, oh, we have to be better than that. Like, yeah, we can't spend time talking about writing a check when there's so many other things that could be taught. And again, that's not a teacher's fault at all. It's just we need to make a meaningful effort and actually have people who would train them in personal finance. So it's not like, I guess I'll just sort of do this, but like they understand the importance of it, they care about it, they're passionate. Because I think, if you're not passionate about your subject, like it's very hard to get the kids invested.
No pun intended, right?
No pun intended. That's right.
I love that. So, yeah, I think that's huge. And if anyone has connections with somebody who can start getting this message out of like, we need to train teachers on personal finance, start beating that drum. I've been trying to connect with, we have like these service centers here in Texas that are like in charge of like PD for whole regions of the state. I've
Yeah.
been trying to connect with them and say like, you have this mandate coming up where you need to have a personal finance class and your teachers are unprepared. Let me offer a training on how to teach personal finance, what you need to
Yeah.
know. I'm like, oh, we'll see if they're interested. I'm like, you need to tell them to be interested. Like,
Yeah, this train's coming whether you want it to or not. Like it's going to be at your doorstep and you'd rather, be ready for that knock when it comes.
yeah. So it's just it's frustrating that people aren't catching the vision as much as we need them to, for sure.
Agreed.
Uh, so if someone's feeling unprepared to teach personal finance, let's say they found this podcast because they're like, I was asked to teach personal finance. What do I do now? What would you say the first step is to get started in that journey?
Yeah, I really think the first step is like whether it's my book or somebody else's or some other resource, really ask yourself and be honest, like, do I really know these things, right? And so I think maybe the most used curriculum, Next Gen Personal Finance, which I think they have a lot of great materials out there. My book happens to line up with that book pretty well, but like, you should have a good idea of like what is it that you want to teach. Like for me, I go over interest, I go over different types of banking, bank accounts, credit cards, investing, retirement. So I've got like my 10 or 11 things that I know. But yeah, if you're getting into this, you should really ask yourself, how much do I know about it? Like, do I really understand these things? And before anything else, it sounds crazy, but and I'm very biased here, but if you were to read my book or a book like it, even Ramit Sethi's or something like that, reading it one book, like if you haven't done it before, like you'll probably walk away like, oh, okay, I didn't know a lot of these things. And, without a foundation, I think it's really hard to go into something and not be completely intimidated. Right. So, I mean, step one would be like really get your bearings. Ask yourself, do you know it? But there's so many different like financial sort of communities at this point for like teachers and stuff. Ask them out, and it's really crowdsourced. I feel like you said, since there's not a great overarching like mandate coming down from the skies of exactly what to do, so much I feel like has been just through teachers talking to each other. This works for me, this doesn't. But yeah, I mean the more obvious one, the lower hanging fruit is you yourself should learn these things first. Like really get a grasp of what is it you're being asked to teach and how well do you know it. Like if somebody were to come up to you right now and explain an index fund, do you think you'd be prepared to do it? But yeah, once you get that foundation, I think you'll be a lot less intimidated, and of course, like you'll benefit personally from knowing these things, right? Financially, you will. It should help you.
I love that. I love that. And I just want to point out a couple of things. So you mentioned Next Gen Personal Finance as another resource. Uh, Great people over there. I had Yaneli Espinal, who works for them, on
Hmm.
the show. We talked about financial literacy in the classroom as well. And there are groups of teachers that do this that would love to help you. My friend Rob Phelan has a group that he helps run, Finlit Fanatics group.
I'm a proud member, Finlet Fanatics. Yeah.
Indeed, it's a good one. And the 4-3 Wise Facebook group is also a great place that you can just ask questions about anything teacher money related, and people on there are very happy to jump on. If you'd like links to any of those, you can go to the show notes at teachmyshow.com/podcast or go to the description of the link for this show in your podcast player. And you can find the links to Next Gen Personal Finance or any of these other groups on Facebook where you can ask questions because that's the place to really, get at that crowdsourcing is absolutely essential to learn it yourself and get good information because you're going to get oh, we have this local credit union who comes in and talks, and whether or not they're actually good is entirely like a
Correct. Yeah.
crapshoot, right? So
Yeah.
you're going to want to verify everything with people in these groups who have done it, who know what they're talking about, and find the right thing. And I'm just going to put a huge plug in here for reading books and reading books with your students. Because unlike, that 35-year-old or 40-year-old in debt who picks up a text and then they're, like ready to go and they're like, oh, I've got all this experience, right? When you have no experience, you can't just talk to them about it. You need to have some sort of shared experience, and books are a great way to do this. So like, your book, of course, but there's a lot of other great books out there. So having a text that you can read and then discuss because they don't have life experience
Of
is
course.
a great thing to go off of instead of just like a dry like here's the definition, fill in the blank, right?
No, it's
The
so
word that you'd
boring.
approach is
Yeah.
boring and with no experience, it doesn't stick. That's why it's ineffective. So having a rich text to read, discuss, and then be like, okay, like how would we implement this in our actual life? You're gonna, graduate soon, you're gonna go to college, you're gonna, you know, buy a car. Like, what does that look like?
Correct.
Those types of things are really powerful. There are two different problems that we have when teaching personal finance, and I think we've kind of talked about them already, but I want to get your take on this specific question. The problem of being overwhelming because there is way too much. They usually give you a semester to teach personal finance, which is just so short.
It is
It goes
not a
by
lot of
so
time.
right. Uh, but then there's also the boring aspect of it because there's a lot of jargon in there. Because like with anything, like you'd have to learn the vocabulary before you can really engage in a conversation about it. So how do you overcome the overwhelm piece by
Hmm.
not, just fire hosing them and not being boring at the same time?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think it's, yeah, maybe the question in personal finance, probably education in general. The couple of things, so I have 10 units that I try to teach in a semester, and it varies every year. So like, don't be rigid in your mindset of I'm going to spend 2 weeks on this, 3 weeks on this. Like for me, the longer I've done this, if a class really gets into something, I like let it ride. And I'm not asking the question like, am I wasting time? Right? Like if they're really interested in it, let's go for it. Because I think if they're 25 years old, they're not going to remember every unit of your, 11th or 12th grade personal finance class. They're just not. But I think the goal is if you give them that foundation and you give them enough confidence to sort of research the problems on their own and be able to like, not be intimidated. If they see a 401k while they're looking it up, they're like, I remember this. I like have an idea from Mr. Morgan's class. Yeah. So, you just accept the fact you're not going to when they grad they're not going to be a perfect they know everything there is to know they know as much as I do, but focus on what are the things you want them to focus on the most, right? What are the most important things you want to teach them, and don't be afraid of like letting that conversation like, all right, I've spent 25 minutes just telling my class about blunders I've made. Or if like they start talking about sort of weird questions like, oh, I saw on this TikTok video like an infinite money loop. And then you just sort of like, I'll go down that tangent and be like, how does this make sense to you? Like, do you think if this were real that everybody would do it? So yeah, you want to have goals for yourself, but if you're like, I need to teach them every single one of these things that's being handed down to me, and in a single semester I have to get through all of this, you're probably going to come up short. But, you know, did you give them the foundation of, let's say, even 4 or 5 things that they really need to know? And really, I try to focus on concepts so much more. Like, I'll spend 2 weeks, 3 weeks just on interest, like just on interest. When you pay back a loan, how much money goes to the interest? How long will it take if you pay $400 a month versus $600 a month versus $800 a month? Because if you understand interest, I mean, that is such a crucial component, and so many people just sort of like breeze over that. I just had my test yesterday, or sorry, on Friday, and like that, it's a hard test. Like I asked them, a ton of questions, just a ton of different sort of situations. You know, you're 25 years old, you're buying a car that's $30,000, you have X for a down payment, here's your APR. But like that lesson alone, like if you can understand that, once you get to the chapter on debt or even investing, you understand interest rates, it makes so much more sense. So if they can understand the concepts of building wealth, that's going to translate in so many other aspects of their life. So in that very long-winded response, I'd say choose the things that you really want them to focus on, and don't be afraid to sort of let the class steer you. Like, what is it that they're interested in? And sort of, you know, if it's completely bonkers, you know, don't spend too much time there. But yeah, don't be worried about like, no, we got to move on. I got to hit this next standard or whatever it is.
And that is great advice for teaching in general, not just personal finance,
I agree.
because there's never enough time to teach all the standards. So stick with something, get it deep, get them to understand something, because
Correct.
getting to understand one thing really well is much better than regurgitating a million things and then forgetting them, right? So
Yeah. Any test
that
of like rote memorization with 50 questions, it's like, no, I want to ask like three or four questions that are going to really question some critical thinking and get them to implement a couple skills.
absolutely. Okay, just got a few more questions for you as we're wrapping up here. My I'm not sure where this is going to go question is
Okay, I like
what's
it.
been your favorite part of teaching personal finance?
My favorite part, I think it's just how I don't know if you've experienced this with your students, but like my students are so interested, and I think they've become more interested. You know, this is my eighth or ninth year teaching this. They've only become more interested, and I think unfortunately a lot of it is just sort of like the maybe some more doomsday things they hear on social media about oh, Social Security is gone, you'll never be able to buy a house or whatever it is, which you know. What what's that saying is like, you know, things are getting a little tighter. Like you do have to be financially disciplined. You have to really work hard and be smart with your money. But all of those factors have made my students really interested, like asking sincere questions. And like I said, when I'm in my English class, I could feel sometimes the students, half the class is just like, "Whew, what are we doing, man? Like, why are we learning this? Like, this is not important." And I never have that feeling with personal finance. Like especially the seniors that are right on the doorstep of, you know, adulthood. Um, and just being able to bring in like basically any news article, you can always connect it back to personal finance. And it really, I think it makes, you know, students and young people in general, they feel so empowered when they sort of feel like adults, you know, when they could talk about, oh, did you see like the Fed raised the interest rate? Like that makes them feel like, ooh, I kind of sound smart right there. Um, but yeah, personal finance, it affords them so many opportunities to do that. So between their sincere interest in the topic and them sort of getting to, you know, practice their adult conversations, I love that.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. My school is putting a huge emphasis on, making sure that we're actually moving the needle on, good writing skills, good mathematical reasoning, because, test scores are how people determine if they think a school is good or not. And we want to make sure that ours are showing, that we've got it,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
And I was like, personal finance is the best class for that because
correct.
we have to have mathematical reasoning, but we don't like show people equations when we are doing personal finance. We write
Hmm.
it out. So
Yeah,
you have to be able to then put it into a narrative that makes sense. And it's just it is like if your administrator like, I'm not sure if we want a personal finance elective or anything like that, you can really go to bat on this is going to teach real critical thinking skills for math. And it's going to be real writing skills because they have to be able to write about it in an intelligent way. So I
100%.
think that those are two skills that just like come together perfectly in personal finance.
Yeah. And it's like a sneaky way to get them to do math. They'll have kids like, oh, this class is so fun, like doing like a, you know, some stock simulation where they're calculating percentages and stuff. I'm like, you just, you know, and I've heard from your math teachers, like, you hate math. Like, yeah, I don't like math, but this is really fun. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to tell you, but this is all math. Like you're doing math right now, whether you know it or not. But just because it's dollars instead of numbers, you're all of a sudden very interested.
Because it has that connection that makes sense to them. They know why they're doing it. And I
Yeah,
think
it's
that's what.
tangible. Yeah.
Okay, so last two questions for you as we're wrapping up here. If a teacher wants to know more about how to adult, the book, or just how to adult in general, or they just need to ask you a question, how can they get in contact with you?
Of course, yeah. First, I love when teachers reach out. So my website is HTA personalfinance.com, and that's so HTA like how to adult. So HTA personalfinance.com. And on that website, I've got videos that explain sort of my lessons. I also have, if you reach out to me directly, I work with so many schools because my book on Amazon, I think is, 15-ish dollars with tax. But if you're a teacher and if you message me, I can give you a bulk pricing on that. So that saves you a lot of money. And then also I have a workbook for teachers that goes with my book. I think it's about 60 pages now, and that workbook has activities. It has sort of like quizzes, homework assignments. It's got a lot of different things that you can be used in the classroom or projects for the students. So between those two things, yeah, htapersonalfinance.com, and then my email is just jake at htapersonalfinance.com. Again, you can find all of that at that website.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, I threw out into the ether an email to Jake, being like, "Hey, I'm thinking about using your book. I guess I have a question for you." And within a couple of hours, Jake responded to me and told me all about it, answered my questions about it, sent me the workbook link. Like, he was very, very helpful. That's why I decided to go with using his book for the class. I hadn't read it yet, and I'm very glad I did. So he's very responsive, very helpful. I will, with your permission, include the workbook in the
Of course,
description
yeah.
or the show notes, so you can get that there. And it's just a fantastic companion to the book when you're teaching it, especially. And like I said, if you want to get the direct links, so you don't have to remember these things, just go to teachmoneyShow.com/podcast or click the link in your show notes description on your podcast player. All right, last question for you, Jake. What is your number one tip for teachers to have a richer wallet, classroom, and life?
Ooh, richer wallet, classroom, and life. So, I mean, for me, the wallet. So, being a teacher, you sort of got the summer off, and again, sort of the lesson I always teach, with investing is even a little bit helps. So if you're worried about retirement, whatever it is, if you could pick up some sort of side hustle, I talk about this in my book. I was an Uber driver for years, and my Uber driver was strictly my retirement like supplement. I'm like, I was gonna work until I made $200 or $300 per month doing Uber during the summer, and I'd throw that into my IRA. Basically, it came up to a couple $1,000s a year. And again, over time, like you think it's not very much money, but it adds up. So it doesn't have to be Uber, but you do have some extra time. And even if it's tutoring or something, what can you maybe do with the extra time that you have? Ask yourself. And again, like this book is the best example of that. Like I never thought of myself as a writer, right? I was never like, oof, I'm definitely a writer. This just happened during the summer. I was writing and, sort of one foot in front of the other, and it's turned into a commercially successful book, which shocked me probably more than anybody. The richer classroom. I mean, like one of the greatest joys for me is like really getting to know my students, right? Really understanding them, and taking their questions. Like if you can build a relationship where they really trust you, they're going to ask more sincere questions. You're going to start to slowly ask questions that are more specific to them, right? Like, ooh, what if I don't have somebody in my life who necessarily makes a lot of money or has given me these tools? So, I mean, for me, like the classes that I've had that are the most memorable are the classes where I've really sort of shared myself and been more vulnerable and created a space where they're comfortable, talking about and asking sincere questions. And then the richer, what was the last one? Richer life? Was it richer life? Um, yeah, I mean the best thing that money could ever buy you is time, right? Like, I mean, if you're truly wealthy, like you basically just get to spend your time the way you want to. So if you have gotten to the point where you've maybe saved some money, make sure you're spending your time, however, in a way that gives you the most meaning and gratitude.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jake, for writing the book, for sharing your wisdom with us today, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
I appreciate it. Sean, thanks for having me on here.
Wow. Wasn't that a great episode? Thank you, Jake, so much for coming on the show. Now for my top takeaways, my cliff notes of this episode. Number one, read a ton of books. Reading books is how you're going to learn about personal finance and prepare yourself to be ready to teach it. Number two, find a tribe that understands how hard it is and the shame that can go with doing it wrong, and then show the path forward. This is kind of a huge compound idea, but this idea that it's okay to have done something wrong, to have made mistakes, because it actually makes other people feel like they can make it too. And I hope I've done a good job at that. I've made some dumb mistakes, and I've tried to share those, particularly in my real estate. But I just know that I'm not perfect, and I've made mistakes probably in the past day. But I'm still trying and doing better every single day. Number three, make things relatable when you're teaching personal finance. Don't be dry about it. Make sure that you are making it about things that are happening here now and in their lives. That's going to make them want to learn. Number four, scare them and show them the potential. I love this dual thing where you have to scare them a little bit, make them be like, oh crap, this really matters, but then show them what can happen if they do it right. Fantastic approach to teaching personal finance. Number five, do I know personal finance? Make sure you learn it yourself. Really understand what you're teaching. If you get asked to teach anything, if you have not learned it, internalized it yourself, you've got to do that. I have a teacher that I'm working with who is teaching Algebra 1 for the first time ever. He's very smart in math, but he hasn't taught Algebra 1 ever. So he said, I spend more time learning Algebra 1 than I do teaching it, because he wants to know it well enough that he can teach it from multiple angles, multiple aspects, and not just repeat the same example from textbook. It's so important to really understand what you're going to teach. Number six, follow their interest. Don't be afraid to stay on something that your students really care about, they're really interested in. Go deep into just a few things instead of trying to cover everything. There's too much in personal finance to really get the idea across for everything. So make sure they understand a few important things when you're teaching it. Number seven, this is his final takeaway. I love these three pieces. Use a side hustle to supplement your retirement. I think that's fantastic. Live on your own income and then use that side hustle income to put towards retirement. Then make sure that when you're in your classroom, you're building those relationships, be vulnerable with them, right? Share your mistakes so that way they know that you're a human being and not a robot, right? Try and create that connection with them. That's going to make a richer classroom. And then finally, make sure you are spending your money on time. Get your time back with your money. Have a richer life. These were some fantastic takeaways. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I hope that as you prepare to teach personal finance, as that becomes more and more required across the states, that we will be able to make a positive impact in the lives of these students as we teach personal finance the way it was intended to. And as you go out and do this and make this impact, remember, as a teacher, you are already rich. Your wallet just needs to catch up.
If you would like help on your personal financial situation, go to teachermoneyshow.com/coaching and you'll be able to find different ways I can help you there. If you would like to participate in spreading this message of financial empowerment to teachers, I would encourage you to talk to your administrator or to your district level about going to SeanKMorgan.com to find more information there. And regardless of which one of those you need, please like and subscribe so that way we can spread the reach of this more. Leave a 5-star rating and review. That's going to help more teachers find this, and then turn around and tell a teacher friend. I really appreciate it.
The contents of this podcast are informational in nature and are not legal or tax advice, and neither I nor my guests are engaged in the provision of legal, tax, or any other advice. You should not act upon this information without first seeking appropriate advice from an accountant, financial planner, lawyer, or other professional.